She had been looking forward to this trip for months. Traveling had always been a mix of excitement and exhaustion for her, but this time it was different. Returning home after a few days away, she was tired yet filled with relief. The city's airport buzzed with activity, the usual hum of rolling suitcases, announcements over loudspeakers, and the chatter of travelers creating an endless background soundtrack. She adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder, trying to keep her mind on the familiar routine of arriving and going through security. The airport had always felt like a second home to her in a way. She had grown up traveling often, watching her parents navigate security lines and airports as part of their official life. She knew exactly how to move, when to present her documents, how to smile politely at strangers, and when to keep her gaze forward and ignore unnecessary attention. Yet something about today felt slightly off. Perhaps it was just the tiredness, the weight of her luggage, or the way the air conditioning seemed harsher than usual. As she approached the security checkpoint, she noticed a group of police officers gathered near one of the gates. They were leaning casually against the counters, chatting quietly among themselves, but their eyes flicked toward her almost immediately. She felt a small, almost imperceptible pause in their conversation, the way their voices trailed off when she drew near. At first she thought nothing of it. People glanced at strangers all the time, but then she heard a few murmurs, soft enough to be dismissed yet sharp in their tone. "Hey, over here," one of them said, waving slightly. She hesitated for a moment, unsure whether they were calling someone else or her. Their smiles were too wide, too forced, not the kind you offer politely to a traveler. Something in the way they looked at her made her uneasy. She had learned early on to trust that small gut feeling that whispered when something wasn't quite right. Trying to shake off the discomfort, she walked toward them. "Good afternoon," she said politely, hoping to diffuse whatever she imagined. But the laughter that followed her greeting wasn't warm. It was sharp, teasing, edged with something she couldn't quite name. She caught the look of amusement passing among the officers, exchanged in quick glances, and realized that this attention was not random. One of the officers stepped forward, a slightly taller man with a trimmed beard and a uniform that seemed freshly pressed. "We just thought we'd have a little fun with you," he said, the words casual but the tone carrying an edge. She smiled politely, unsure whether to take it seriously. "Fun?" she asked, her voice careful, a little tight around the edges. "Yeah, just a joke. Don't worry," another officer chimed in, chuckling. "We see you and we thought, why not?" Their words were light, but the undercurrent of their behavior was anything but. She tried to laugh it off, the polite, nervous chuckle that came easily to her in moments of discomfort. Yet a small knot of unease formed in her stomach. As she moved closer to the counter, the first officer gestured toward her hands almost playfully. "Mind if we just check something?" he asked, his tone casual. She raised her eyebrows, unsure. "Check something?" she repeated, her voice cautious now. The air around her seemed to shift slightly, the gentle hum of the airport now carrying a sharper edge as more travelers glanced curiously at the exchange. She considered stepping back, telling them she was fine, that she didn't need any attention, but something in her upbringing, the lessons her parents had instilled in her about facing challenges with composure, made her stand her ground. "I'm fine," she said firmly, but not angrily. "I don't see what needs checking." The officers exchanged a glance again, that same subtle communication that seemed to carry more meaning than the words themselves. One of them reached into his pocket slowly, deliberately, almost theatrically. "It's just a little joke," he said again, smiling. "Don't take it personally." She noticed now that his eyes were not smiling, that the warmth he tried to show with his grin didn't reach his expression. There was a sharpness in his look, an unspoken message that made her uneasy. Her instincts, sharpened from years of being aware of how she was treated in public spaces, whispered that this was more than just a joke. There was a tone here, subtle but clear, that suggested judgment, perhaps even bias. She had encountered it before, moments where people's smiles and laughter carried an edge of something unkind or dismissive, something that marked her as different in ways she could not control. She felt the weight of those past experiences press down, reminding her that even small moments could carry significance. Trying to remain calm, she took a small step forward, placing her bag securely against her hip. "I really don't understand," she said, keeping her voice steady. "Why is this necessary?" Her words hung in the air for a moment, met with silence that was too long for comfort. Then one officer tilted his head slightly, studying her, as if measuring how she would react. "Don't worry," he said, finally breaking the silence. "We're just having a bit of fun. You should lighten up." His tone was casual, but there was a hint of condescension. She felt her patience stretching thin, but she maintained her composure, unwilling to let them provoke her in a public setting. She reminded herself that her reactions mattered, that keeping calm was the strongest position she could hold. Another officer, standing slightly to the side, stepped closer, his hand brushing briefly against the counter. "We could handcuff you for a second, just for fun," he said lightly. The words caught in her throat. At first she thought she had misheard. Handcuff her, for fun? Her mind raced, trying to process whether this was some sort of bizarre misunderstanding, or if they truly intended to act on it. She looked around, noticing that other travelers were watching now, some with confused expressions, others with their phones raised, capturing the moment. A quiet tension had begun to spread through the air, almost imperceptible at first, but undeniable. The casual, joking tone of the officers had taken on a sharper edge, and the atmosphere around her felt heavier, charged with something unspoken. Her instincts screamed at her to step back, to remove herself from the situation before it escalated. But there was another part of her, the part that refused to be intimidated in public, that refused to allow someone else's biases or whims to dictate her behavior. She squared her shoulders slightly, took a measured breath, and addressed the officer directly. "I don't think that's appropriate," she said calmly but firmly. "Please don't do that." The officer laughed lightly, a sound that didn't reach his eyes. "Relax," he said again. "We're just joking around. Don't make this a big deal." The casual dismissal of her discomfort only made her more alert. She could feel the undercurrent of something deeper, a bias in the way they approached her, in the way they assumed that she would accept their behavior without question. As she spoke, she noticed the other travelers shifting, some exchanging glances, some whispering quietly to each other. There was an awareness spreading, a subtle recognition that something unusual was happening. The airport, normally a place of routine and order, now felt slightly charged with tension. She could sense that the small circle of officers around her was becoming increasingly aware of the attention they were drawing. Trying to maintain her composure, she reminded herself of the lessons she had learned growing up in the public eye. Visibility, presence, and calmness were her tools. She stood tall, her expression neutral but firm, and waited for the officers to step back. But the situation didn't ease. Instead, the first officer took another step closer, reaching toward her with a hand that seemed almost playful, yet carried a weight of authority that made her heart rate quicken. "Come on. Just a little fun," he said again, his tone light, but the words themselves felt heavy. She met his gaze steadily, refusing to flinch. "No," she said simply. "I don't think that's fun at all." Her voice carried a quiet strength, one that drew the attention of nearby passengers even more. Phones tilted, whispers exchanged, eyes focused. The casual playfulness of the officer's actions now seemed stark against her calm defiance. For a few moments the tension held, like a thin thread stretching between them. Then one officer, the one who had first spoken to her, tilted his head slightly as if reassessing her response. "All right," he said finally, though there was a tightness in his jaw, a subtle frustration barely hidden behind his words. "Maybe not." Even as they spoke, she could feel the lingering discomfort, the awareness that what had just occurred was not a simple joke. It carried a weight, an undercurrent of bias that reminded her of the reality she had navigated for years. She adjusted her bag again, feeling a mixture of relief and lingering unease, and moved forward toward the security line, her mind processing the strange encounter she had just endured. As she continued through the airport, she couldn't shake the feeling that the world was watching, that her presence had been measured and judged in ways that others might never understand. Yet she also felt a quiet pride in herself for standing firm, for refusing to accept behavior that was inappropriate, regardless of how casually it was presented. The lesson lingered. Sometimes even playful gestures could reveal deeper truths. And courage was not always about confrontation. It was about presence, calm, and clarity in moments that tested you unexpectedly. This completes part 1 in a long, engaging human-centric narrative format. She also knew that the next steps, whether official complaints, public awareness, or personal reflection, would carry their own challenges. Even as she walked toward the airport exit, she felt a renewed determination. She had faced intimidation, subtle bias, and misuse of authority with calm and clarity. She had asserted her boundaries without aggression and had used the presence of witnesses to ensure accountability. The experience, though unsettling, reinforced her understanding of personal strength, public perception, and the importance of standing firm in moments when casual behavior masks deeper prejudices. The moment seemed to stretch longer than it should have. She thought the tension was over, that the officers had backed down and that she could finally move forward. But as she stepped through the scanner, a sudden shift in the air told her something was about to happen. Her instincts, honed over years of navigating uncomfortable or even threatening situations, screamed at her to be alert. The airport buzzed with its usual noise, but she could sense a small cluster of attention focused on her, watching, waiting. Then it happened. The taller officer, the one who had insisted the joke was harmless, moved with surprising speed. Before she could fully react, he reached for her wrists and clasped the cold metal handcuffs around them. The movement was deliberate, sudden, and carried a force that left her stunned. Time seemed to slow as the reality of the situation hit. The cold metal pressed against her skin, an uncomfortable reminder that this was not just a casual threat. Her mind raced, trying to reconcile what had just happened with what she knew to be true. She had done nothing wrong. Passengers around them gasped, some stepping back, some raising their phones to record what was unfolding. The noise in the airport seemed to fade, replaced by the sharp, tense energy radiating from the small group surrounding her. The officer who had handcuffed her smiled. The same forced smile from before, but now it looked more like a mask. "Relax," he said lightly, as if his words could erase the shock and embarrassment of being restrained in public. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to remain calm. Panic was tempting, a natural reaction, but she knew it would not help. Her mind flicked through every lesson she had learned from her upbringing. Stay composed, speak clearly, assert your identity and rights, and never let fear dictate your movements. She raised her head slightly, looking directly at him. "This is not acceptable," she said, her voice steady. "I demand you remove these handcuffs immediately." The taller officer laughed, a short, sharp sound that carried easily in the open space. "It's just a joke," he said again. "We're just having some fun. No need to make a scene." His tone was casual, almost mocking, and it made her pulse quicken. It wasn't just the act of handcuffing her, it was the dismissal of her voice, the assumption that she would comply silently. The laughter of the other officers around him only made it worse, a chorus that seemed to validate his behavior. She took a small step forward, careful not to make sudden movements that could provoke further escalation. "This is harassment," she said firmly. "I am asking you to remove the handcuffs now. I have done nothing wrong." Her words carried a quiet authority that seemed to draw the attention of bystanders. Travelers began whispering among themselves, some holding up phones, others craning their necks to watch the scene unfold. One passenger, a middle-aged woman with a kind face, spoke up.
"Hey, that's not right. You can't just handcuff her for fun."
Her voice was firm but not aggressive, and it seemed to draw attention from others. A few more voices joined in, quietly at first, then more boldly, expressing confusion and disapproval. The officers glanced around, the tension in their posture subtly shifting as they realized they were being watched by more than just casual travelers. The taller officer's hand, still holding the metal clasp, trembled slightly, a small sign that his authority was being questioned. "Come on, it's just a joke," he repeated, but his voice lacked the certainty it had carried before. The other officer, younger and less confident, shuffled nervously, unsure whether to continue or back away. She kept her eyes on him, steady and unwavering, refusing to let his attempt at intimidation succeed. Her mind raced, calculating the best approach. Physical resistance could escalate the situation dangerously. Verbal assertiveness, combined with the attention of witnesses, seemed the safest and most effective strategy. "I am telling you clearly," she said, her voice carrying over the hum of the airport. "Remove the handcuffs now. This behavior is completely inappropriate." Her words were simple, precise, and unyielding, demanding immediate action without aggression. A few more passengers began murmuring, questioning the officers. Some raised their phones, the click of cameras and video recording devices punctuating the tense moment. She realized that public attention was now her ally. The casual confidence of the officers, the arrogance that had fueled their playful harassment, was faltering in the face of witnesses who would not remain silent. The officer's smile faltered, his hand tightening slightly around the metal as if trying to maintain control. All right, he said finally, a note of frustration creeping into his voice. Maybe we should... His words were cut off as she spoke again, her tone calm but firm. No, remove them now. I am asking you respectfully but firmly. This is not a joke. For a brief moment there was silence. The crowd of travelers held their breath almost collectively. Even the airport security personnel, observing from nearby, seemed to recognize that something unusual was happening. The tension hung in the air, thick and palpable, as if the next second would determine the outcome. Then, almost imperceptibly, the officer began to release the handcuffs. The metal clinked softly as they opened, and she pulled her hands free, flexing her wrist to relieve the pressure. Relief surged through her, but it was tempered by lingering awareness. This incident had exposed more than the officer's poor judgment. It had revealed a bias, an assumption that her presence could be trivialized or made into a public joke. She adjusted her bag again, ensuring her belongings were secure. The crowd around her remained attentive, some whispering to each other, some shaking their heads in disbelief. A young man nearby muttered, "I can't believe they thought this was okay," his voice audible enough for the officers to hear. The taller officer looked around, clearly uncomfortable now, his earlier confidence replaced by subtle irritation and embarrassment. Even as she moved forward toward the exit of the security area, she could feel the lingering awareness of what had just occurred. It was more than embarrassment. It was a clear reminder of how power could be misused even in small, seemingly playful gestures. The public display had made it worse, exposing her to humiliation, yet also offering a layer of protection through witnesses who would not let the incident go unnoticed. She kept her posture steady, her movements deliberate, and her gaze calm. Her breathing slowed gradually, a conscious effort to reclaim control over her body and emotions. She reminded herself that her response mattered, that the ability to stay composed in the face of harassment was a powerful form of resistance. Each step forward was a reaffirmation of her dignity, her presence, and her right to be treated with respect. The officers, now aware of the scrutiny, began to retreat slightly. Their playful demeanor had vanished, replaced by careful observation and a hint of defensiveness. She noted this silently, understanding that the dynamic had shifted in her favor. The presence of witnesses, the attention of other travelers, and her steady assertiveness had disrupted their initial plan to intimidate. Yet, even as she moved away, she felt the tension linger in her chest. The incident was a stark reminder that moments of bias could appear unexpectedly, in places she assumed were safe or routine. Airports, while generally secure and regulated, were still spaces where authority could be wielded arbitrarily, and where assumptions based on appearance could manifest in harassment. She made a mental note to address the situation formally later, to ensure that such behavior would be scrutinized and accountable measures taken. As she reached a quieter area beyond the security line, she paused to gather her thoughts. The rush of emotions, shock, anger, relief, pride, and lingering unease, intertwined in her mind. She knew the story of this moment would not end here. It had already started circulating in whispers, in videos captured by travelers, in murmurs that might grow into something more significant. The power of public attention had protected her in the moment, but the lessons she carried from it were enduring. She took a deep breath, grounding herself. Each inhale and exhale reminded her of her strength, her resilience, and her ability to navigate spaces that could otherwise feel threatening. She had been handcuffed without cause, humiliated in public, and faced authority misused, yet she had retained composure and dignity. That awareness, subtle but profound, became her anchor as she continued moving through the airport. Even as she walked toward the waiting area, she could feel the eyes of others on her, some sympathetic, some curious, some indignant. Travelers exchanged quiet comments discussing what had occurred. Some expressed disbelief that officers could behave this way. Others noted the courage it took to remain calm and assert boundaries in such a situation. She recognized that her experience had resonated with them in ways she hadn't anticipated, that witnessing injustice often stirred emotions and reflection. She reached the seating area and sat down, adjusting her bag again. The weight of the day pressed against her shoulders, but she allowed herself a small measure of relief. She had navigated a delicate and tense moment with composure, had asserted her rights clearly, and had relied on the presence of others to reinforce accountability. Yet she knew the story was far from over. The incident would likely trigger questions, reports, and reflections on systemic issues that allowed such behavior to occur. Her phone buzzed with messages from family and friends, asking if she was all right. She responded carefully, summarizing the situation without letting panic or fear creep into her words. Each message reminded her of the support network she had, the people who would advocate for her, and the awareness that she was not alone in confronting injustice. The incident, though brief, had left a lasting impression. It reminded her of the fragility of safety, the importance of composure, and the necessity of asserting boundaries even in public spaces where authority could be misused. She reflected on the lessons learned, the subtle ways bias manifests, the power of public attention, and the resilience required to navigate unexpected challenges with dignity. The moment she left the immediate chaos of the airport, she felt an overwhelming mix of relief and lingering tension. Her hands were free, her dignity restored for now, but she knew the impact of what had just happened would not fade quickly. The incident had not been trivial. It had exposed a raw edge of authority misused, a subtle but undeniable bias in the way she had been treated. Even as she walked toward the quieter lounge area, her mind replayed each second, each word, each gesture, analyzing, questioning, and absorbing the weight of the experience. Her phone vibrated constantly with messages and notifications. Some were from family members checking on her safety. Others were from friends who had learned through social media posts and early video uploads that something unusual had occurred. One message read simply, "We saw what happened. Are you okay?" Another said, "This is unacceptable. People need to know." She felt a surge of gratitude for the support, a reminder that she was not alone in facing such a moment, and that her voice mattered. The videos that had begun circulating on social media showed snippets of the handcuff incident, the tension, the casual yet alarming behavior of the officers, and the reactions of bystanders. She watched with a quiet intensity, noting how each clip captured different aspects of the encounter. Some angles showed the officers laughing and joking as if nothing was wrong. Others highlighted her calm, composed demeanor, standing her ground against harassment. The contrast was striking, illustrating how small moments in public spaces could carry immense significance when documented and shared. News outlets quickly picked up the story. Headlines appeared on various platforms, describing a troubling incident at the airport involving officers and a passenger who had been handcuffed for no apparent reason. The narrative varied slightly depending on the outlet. Some focused on the playful joke described by the officers. Others emphasized the public outcry and questions about misuse of authority. She watched, careful to note how the incident was being portrayed, understanding that public perception could influence the investigation, accountability measures, and broader conversations about bias and authority. Her family contacted the airport authorities demanding a thorough investigation. The governor's office became involved, recognizing the gravity of the incident. Meetings were scheduled, statements were prepared, and security footage from multiple cameras around the airport was reviewed in detail. Every moment she had experienced, the approach of the officers, the words spoken, the handcuffing, the intervention of bystanders, was carefully analyzed. The investigation revealed what she already knew instinctively. The officers had acted inappropriately, treating her differently than they would have any other passenger, under the guise of humor. She sat in a quiet room, speaking with officials, recounting the incident in precise detail. Each description, each pause, each reaction mattered. She spoke of the initial attention, the playful but condescending remarks, the moment the handcuffs closed on her wrists, and the mixture of fear, shock, and anger that she had felt. She emphasized the subtle racial undertones that had made the situation more than just a poor joke, highlighting the deeper implications of bias and the misuse of authority in public spaces. At the same time, she navigated the flood of social media attention. People were expressing outrage, sharing their own experiences of bias and commenting on the courage it took to stand firm in such a situation. Supportive messages poured in from across the country, reminding her that her experience resonated with many who had faced similar encounters. Yet there were also critics, some questioning why she had not reacted differently, others attempting to diminish the severity of the officer's actions. She understood that public scrutiny came with visibility, but she remained focused on the truth and the accountability that needed to follow. Journalists reached out for interviews, seeking her perspective on how the incident unfolded, the role of authority in public spaces, and the subtle ways bias can manifest. She spoke thoughtfully, emphasizing that this was not about personal anger or revenge. It was about ensuring that such behavior was recognized, addressed, and prevented in the future. She described the incident in human terms, explaining how it felt to be publicly humiliated, the instinctive tension when authority is misused, and the importance of standing firm in moments where one's dignity is at stake. Meanwhile, the airport issued a statement acknowledging the incident, promising a thorough investigation and cooperation with law enforcement authorities. The statement emphasized a commitment to safety, fairness, and respect for all travelers. Though the words were formal and measured, they marked a critical step in accountability, signaling that even actions initially dismissed as jokes could have serious consequences when they violated trust and boundaries. The officers involved faced immediate scrutiny. Internal reviews highlighted failures in judgment, professionalism, and adherence to protocols. Supervisors noted the lack of awareness regarding the impact of their actions on the passenger and the potential implications for public trust in airport security and law enforcement. The playful tone that had masked the seriousness of the incident was now under a microscope, and even their casual laughter was scrutinized for its inappropriate context. She found herself reflecting deeply on the power dynamics at play. The incident was more than an isolated event. It revealed a broader truth about public spaces, authority, and the subtle ways prejudice can manifest. It reminded her of the need for awareness, courage, and advocacy, not just in moments of crisis, but in everyday life. Each action, each choice, each response mattered. By standing firm, asserting her rights, and maintaining composure, she had shifted the balance, using presence and clarity as tools to counter intimidation. The public response continued to grow. Advocacy groups, civil rights organizations, and community leaders expressed concern about the incident, emphasizing that no individual should be subjected to harassment or humiliation because of their appearance or identity. Discussions arose about the need for better training, accountability, and awareness among law enforcement officials and airport personnel. Her experience became a case study, a tangible example of how even seemingly minor interactions could reveal systemic issues that required attention and reform. Throughout this period, she navigated a complex web of emotions. There was pride in having maintained composure, gratitude for the support she received, frustration at the behavior of the officers, and determination to ensure accountability. She spoke publicly about the experience, advocating for awareness, fairness, and systemic change. Her words were clear, human, and relatable, emphasizing the importance of dignity, respect, and justice in public interactions. At home, she spent quiet moments reflecting on the incident. She thought about the small details, the weight of the handcuffs on her wrists, the casual arrogance of the officers, the whispers and glances of fellow travelers, and the subtle tension that had pervaded the airport. Each memory was vivid, a reminder of the stakes in moments where authority intersects with personal rights. She realized that these moments, though brief, could have lasting impacts on how one perceives safety, fairness, and human respect. Her family remained a pillar of support, offering advice, reassurance, and guidance on how to navigate the unfolding investigation and public attention. They reminded her that her voice was important, that standing up against injustice mattered, and that even small acts of courage could resonate widely. Their presence was grounding, a reminder that resilience was strengthened not in isolation, but through connection and shared commitment to fairness. As the investigation progressed, the officers were suspended pending review. Discussions emerged about training, protocol revisions, and strategies to prevent similar incidents in the future. The airport and law enforcement authorities recognized the need to address not just individual behavior, but the broader culture that allowed casual harassment and bias to manifest. She followed the updates closely, aware that the outcomes would have implications far beyond her personal experience. She also received messages from strangers who had experienced similar moments of intimidation or bias. They shared stories of public harassment, subtle discrimination, and challenges navigating spaces where authority could be misused. She realized that her experience, though intensely personal, connected to a larger human narrative, one of resilience, dignity, and the ongoing struggle to ensure fairness and accountability in public spaces. Through it all, she remained committed to clarity, composure, and truth. She engaged with the media, with officials, and with public discourse in a measured, human-centric way, emphasizing understanding, empathy, and systemic change rather than anger or revenge. Her voice became a bridge between personal experience and public awareness, showing how individual courage could inspire broader reflection and action. Days turned into weeks as the investigation continued. The public conversation evolved, focusing on training, accountability, and bias awareness. Law enforcement agencies issued statements reaffirming their commitment to professionalism, fairness, and respect for all travelers. Advocacy groups highlighted the incident as a teaching moment, using it to educate both officials and the public about the importance of dignity and equality in everyday interactions. Through every step, she maintained her composure, grounded in the knowledge that her actions had a broader impact. She had faced harassment, intimidation, and bias with clarity and strength, and she had leveraged public attention, personal resolve, and measured communication to ensure accountability. The experience, though challenging, became a source of empowerment, a reminder that even in moments of vulnerability, human dignity and courage could prevail. Even as the incident faded from immediate headlines, its lessons persisted. She reflected on how authority could be misused in subtle ways, how public attention could influence outcomes, and how personal composure and courage could transform moments of harassment into opportunities for accountability and change. The airport incident, brief yet intense, had become a turning point in her understanding of power, bias, and human resilience. She continued to speak publicly about the experience, advocating for awareness, policy changes, and systemic reform. Each conversation, each interview, each public statement reinforced the importance of standing firm, asserting one's rights, and engaging with the world thoughtfully and courageously. Her story became not just about a single incident, but about a broader commitment to fairness, dignity, and justice in public spaces. This completes Part 4, focusing on the investigation, public outrage, and the personal reflections of the governor's daughter in a detailed, human-centered narrative. I can now create Part 5, the final part, showing accountability, resolution, and lasting reflections in the same immersive style. Even after the immediate tension of the airport incident had passed, she felt a subtle weight pressing on her chest. The handcuffs were gone. The officers had been scrutinized, and public attention had offered her a sense of protection, yet the memory lingered in ways she hadn't anticipated. Each time she recalled the officers' smiles, their casual remarks, and the sharpness behind their laughter, she felt the pulse of anger mixed with the relief of having survived the moment with her dignity intact. The incident was over, yet the emotions it stirred refused to fade. At home, she spent hours reflecting on what had happened, writing down the events in her own words, trying to understand each subtle detail, each reaction, each nuance of the encounter. She recognized how ordinary the setting had seemed. The airport, security lines, travelers in a rush, yet how extraordinary and unsettling the behavior had been. It had been more than a misjudgment or a clumsy joke. It had revealed a pattern of authority exercised carelessly and, at times, influenced by bias. Her family continued to offer support, though now it was less about immediate safety and more about navigating the aftermath. They reminded her that her story had power, and that it could inspire awareness, dialogue, and change. They encouraged her to speak openly about the experience, to explain the subtle ways bias manifests, and to advocate for accountability. Her parents emphasized that what happened to her was not just personal. It was a reflection of a larger social issue that affected many people every day. The airport's investigation proceeded steadily. Officials reviewed security footage from multiple angles, spoke to other officers, and examined the behavior of the employees involved. Their findings were clear. The officers had acted inappropriately, overstepped professional boundaries, and treated her differently than they would have treated most other passengers. Their casual laughter and the supposed playfulness of the act could not mask the misuse of authority. The investigation report highlighted these failings in clear terms, emphasizing the need for corrective action and training. When the officers involved were suspended, the news spread quickly. Media outlets reported the updates focusing on accountability, systemic issues, and the public's response. Social media continued to discuss the incident, sharing videos, commenting on the behavior, and debating the broader implications. Some discussions centered on bias and prejudice, others on professionalism and authority, and many on the courage it had taken to remain calm under pressure. She read these discussions carefully, understanding that her experience had resonated far beyond the walls of the airport. She realized that the most lasting impact of the incident was not the embarrassment or fear she had felt, but the awareness it had created. It was a reminder of the importance of vigilance, composure, and clear communication in moments when authority is misused. Even small acts, when observed, could ripple outward, influencing public perception and prompting reflection. Each video, each post, each comment added layers to the story, reinforcing the human consequences of casual bias and the potential for accountability. In private, she allowed herself moments of vulnerability, acknowledging the mixture of emotions that followed. There was anger, frustration, and disbelief, yes, but also pride and a quiet sense of empowerment. She had faced a potentially humiliating situation with calm and clarity. She had asserted her boundaries, relied on the presence of witnesses, and stood firm against authority that sought to intimidate. In doing so, she had turned a moment of potential harm into one of resilience and self-respect. The public conversations inspired by her experience extended beyond immediate reactions. Advocacy groups discussed the need for training in bias awareness, cultural sensitivity, and professional conduct for law enforcement and security personnel. Educational institutions used her story to teach students about human rights, ethics, and the importance of standing up against harassment. Organizations explored strategies to ensure that public spaces like airports were safe, equitable, and respectful for everyone, regardless of appearance or status. She participated in interviews, panel discussions, and community forums, speaking with honesty and clarity. Her words were measured but powerful, recounting her experience while highlighting the broader lessons. She emphasized that the incident was not only about her personal experience, but about systemic patterns that affect countless individuals in everyday life. She spoke about the courage required to maintain composure, the strength found in clear communication, and the role of public attention in ensuring accountability. Her story also resonated on a more personal level. Friends, neighbors, and colleagues shared their own experiences of subtle discrimination, harassment, and intimidation. They expressed appreciation for the visibility her story brought to issues often overlooked. Through these exchanges, she realized that her experience, while intense, was part of a broader human narrative, one in which resilience, dignity, and courage could influence change in ways that were both personal and communal. Meanwhile, the officers faced the consequences of their actions. The suspensions led to further evaluations of training, policy, and accountability. Discussions focused not only on the specific incident, but on the broader need for cultural and ethical awareness in public service roles. The playful behavior that had initiated the incident was acknowledged as inappropriate, unprofessional, and harmful. It became a case study within the department, emphasizing lessons in ethics, respect, and authority. As the days and weeks passed, she found herself thinking less about the immediate fear and more about the broader significance. The incident had been a test of personal resilience, a confrontation with misuse of power, and a demonstration of how calm, composed assertiveness could alter outcomes. She realized that courage was not always about confrontation. It was about presence, clarity, and deliberate action. By standing firm, she had set boundaries, claimed her dignity, and inspired others to consider the impact of bias and authority on human interactions. She also reflected on the role of public awareness. The attention generated by bystanders and social media had created a protective layer that prevented the situation from escalating further. Their presence and documentation had validated her experience and ensured that her voice was heard. She understood that accountability often depended not only on the actions of individuals, but on the attention and engagement of the community. Public scrutiny, when directed responsibly, became a tool for justice. In private moments, she revisited her feelings of fear, frustration, and anger. She allowed herself to feel the vulnerability that had come with being handcuffed in public, the humiliation she had briefly endured, and the subtle power dynamics at play. Acknowledging these feelings was important, It allowed her to process the incident fully and integrate the experience into a broader understanding of human behavior and resilience. She recognized that acknowledging vulnerability was not weakness. It was a crucial step in transforming a challenging moment into a source of insight and growth. The ongoing investigation and public discussion also reinforced her sense of purpose. She understood that sharing her story was not just about personal vindication, but about highlighting systemic patterns, educating others, and fostering change. Her voice had power, and with that power came responsibility. She became more deliberate in her interactions, more mindful of the ways authority could influence behavior, and more committed to advocating for fairness and dignity in public spaces. Over time, the airport and law enforcement agencies implemented measures to prevent similar incidents. Training programs were updated, awareness campaigns were introduced, and protocols for handling passengers were reviewed. Policies emphasized professionalism, respect, and cultural sensitivity. Her experience became a catalyst for change, demonstrating that even brief personal encounters could have lasting institutional impact when addressed thoughtfully and with accountability. She also took steps to ensure her personal growth. She reflected on the lessons learned, the importance of self-advocacy, the role of public attention, the subtle ways bias manifests, and the enduring value of dignity in challenging situations. These reflections became part of her personal narrative, shaping how she approached both public and private interactions moving forward. She recognized that every moment of challenge was also an opportunity to exercise courage, assert boundaries, and influence positive change. Even as the incident faded from immediate headlines, its impact continued to resonate. Conversations in her community, workplace, and social networks reflected the lessons of fairness, dignity, and accountability. Her story remained a point of reference, a reminder that ordinary spaces could reveal extraordinary truths, and that human resilience and composure could transform moments of potential harm into opportunities for awareness and reform. She continued to speak publicly when opportunities arose, emphasizing the human-centered lessons from the airport incident. She shared how fear and uncertainty could coexist with courage and clarity, how public attention could serve as a check on authority, and how each individual's actions could influence the behavior of others. Her words resonated not only because of the incident itself, but because of the authenticity, composure, and insight with which she spoke. In the end, the incident became more than a personal challenge. It became a story of accountability, resilience, and human dignity. She had faced harassment, intimidation, and bias with calmness and assertiveness. She had leveraged the presence of witnesses and the attention of the public to ensure accountability. She had reflected deeply on the experience, using it to advocate for change, educate others, and inspire courage. Looking back, she recognized that the experience had transformed her understanding of human interaction, authority, and personal strength. The airport, once just a routine space, had become a stage for resilience and a lesson in dignity. The officer's inappropriate actions, while unsettling, had catalyzed conversations, reforms, and awareness that extended far beyond that single moment. She realized that moments of injustice, when met with clarity and courage, could spark understanding, inspire others, and reinforce the value of standing firm in the face of bias. She felt a quiet sense of accomplishment, not because she had sought attention or recognition, but because she had preserved her dignity, asserted her rights, and contributed to a broader understanding of fairness and accountability. Her story became a testament to human resilience, demonstrating that even in moments of fear or humiliation, calm, clarity, and courage could prevail. As she moved forward, she carried the lessons with her. She understood the importance of vigilance, the need to assert boundaries, and the power of presence in public spaces. She recognized that personal experiences, even brief and unexpected, could ripple outward to create meaningful change. Most importantly, she embraced the understanding that courage, composure, and human dignity were tools that could transform challenging encounters into opportunities for reflection, growth, and positive impact. In time, the airport incident became a symbol of accountability and reform. Policies changed, awareness increased, and the story of the day she had been handcuffed for fun remained a reference point for discussions about bias, authority, and human resilience. She knew the memory would never fade completely, but neither would the strength, insight, and courage she had gained through navigating it. She had faced fear, intimidation, and public scrutiny. She had emerged with clarity, dignity, and a deeper understanding of the ways human behavior, bias, and authority intersect. Her experience became a story not only of personal survival, but of empowerment, awareness, and change. It was a story she carried forward with pride, humility, and a commitment to ensuring that moments of injustice, no matter how brief or subtle, were met with courage, clarity, and human dignity.